You're about to witness a tale of love, betrayal, and a shocking secret that will change everything. Don't forget to hit that like button to show your support and subscribe so you don't miss a single word. The grand ballroom of the Malmaison estate glittered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Every detail was meticulously arranged for what was heralded as the wedding of the year. Alexander Sterling, the 38-year-old CEO of the tech behemoth Sterling Innovations and one of Britain's wealthiest men, adjusted his Italian silk tie, his gaze sweeping over the final preparations. He had everything a man could possibly desire: a fortune in the billions, an unblemished reputation, and in a few short hours, he was to marry Celestine Vance, the elegant heiress of a prominent Parisian family. Yet, an unshakable anxiety gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't push away no matter how hard he tried to project an air of calm. "Mr. Sterling, the first guests are beginning to arrive." His personal assistant, Philip, a man in his 50s, who had been with him for over a decade, announced discreetly. Alexander nodded, his gray eyes scanning the guest list one last time. 350 carefully selected people. Ministers, ambassadors, captains of industry, and a host of celebrities. They had all come to celebrate his union. But there was only one name on that list that truly mattered to him, and it was her presence that filled him with the most dread. Emily Davies, his first love, his first passion. The woman he had shared 5 intense years with before a tragic misunderstanding tore them apart forever. It had been 8 years since he'd last seen her. 8 long years, during which he built his empire, while trying to forget the scent of her chestnut hair and the sound of her crystalline laugh. Why on earth had he had the insane idea to invite her to his wedding? Perhaps to prove to himself that he had moved on for good. Or maybe, out of sheer masochism. He wasn't entirely sure anymore. What do you think was the real reason behind Alexander's impulsive decision to invite his ex to his wedding? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The hours passed slowly, marked by the effusive congratulations of the guests and the practiced social smiles Alexander handed out with ease. Celestine was radiant in a custom-made wedding dress, her blonde hair perfectly swept up in an intricate chignon, her family jewels gleaming in the lights. She was the epitome of French elegance, the exact kind of woman a man of his stature was meant to marry. Still, Alexander couldn't help but steal glances toward the entrance, searching for a silhouette he would recognize among thousands. "You seem distracted, darling," Celestine whispered, her arm slipping under his. Her perfect smile didn't waver, but he heard the hint of worry in her voice. "Is everything all right?" Alexander forced a smile back, gently stroking her powdered cheek. "Everything is perfectly fine, my love. Just the emotion of the moment." But deep down, he knew he was lying. Nothing was fine, and the suffocating feeling in his chest only grew more intense with each passing minute. The civil ceremony in the estate's gardens unfolded without a hitch under a clear April sky. A close family friend and politician gave a moving speech about love and commitment. Alexander answered, "I do," in a steady voice, but his eyes continued to discreetly scan the crowd. Emily still wasn't there. Perhaps she had decided not to come after all, which was probably for the best. And yet, a part of him couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Applause erupted as the official declared them husband and wife, and Alexander kissed Celestine with all the tenderness he could muster. The photographers captured the moment, which would undoubtedly be labeled the kiss of the year by gossip magazines. But his mind was elsewhere, haunted by a single question. Was this how a man was supposed to feel on his wedding day? This sense of emptiness, as if he were an actor in a play whose script he didn't control? The cocktail reception had been in full swing for about an hour when Philip approached Alexander with his usual air of concern. "Sir, we have a delicate situation at the entrance. A Miss Davies has just arrived, but—" He hesitated, which was uncharacteristic for the normally direct man. "But what, Philip? She hasn't come alone, sir. She's accompanied by a little girl, who appears to be around 7 years old." Alexander felt his blood run cold. 7 years old. Exactly the age a child would be if conceived on their last night together. That night of passion and tears that preceded their final breakup. "Let them in," he said, his voice more strained than he intended. "And Philip, not a word of this to anyone for now." His assistant nodded and quickly moved away, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts, which raced like stampeding horses. A 7-year-old girl. It had to be a coincidence, right? Emily would have told him if she had a child. No, she had never spoken to him again after that fateful night. He had tried to contact her for months, but she had changed her number, moved away, and vanished from his life as if she had never existed. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Alexander continued to smile and shake hands, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on this revelation that threatened to shatter his world. Celestine, thankfully, was preoccupied with friends who were gushing over her dress and jewels, giving him a moment to compose himself. He sipped his champagne, trying to appear relaxed, but his hands trembled slightly, and he had the unnerving feeling that every guest could read his thoughts on his face. That's when he saw her. Emily appeared on the terrace, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her chestnut hair falling freely over her shoulders, her simple but elegant dress highlighting her graceful silhouette. But what truly took his breath away was the little girl holding her hand. A little girl with light brown hair and gray eyes so strikingly similar to his own that he couldn't deny the truth that now hit him like a hammer. The child was his spitting image at that age, the same fine features, the same intense gaze, the same way of tilting her head slightly when something intrigued her. Alexander felt his legs go weak and had to discreetly lean against a column to steady himself. How was it possible? How could Emily have hidden the existence of their daughter from him for all these years? Emily's gaze swept across the gathering until her eyes met his, and in that instant, that felt like an eternity. 8 years of silence and unspoken words hung between them, like a heavy shroud. She was pale, visibly as shaken as he was, but there was a determination in her eyes that he didn't recognize. The little girl, meanwhile, was looking around with curiosity, impressed by the opulence of the estate and the elegance of the guests. "Mommy, is this where my daddy is really getting married?" the child asked, in a clear voice that reached Alexander's ears despite the background noise. Emily leaned down and whispered something to her, but Alexander had heard what he needed to hear. "Daddy." The little girl was talking about him as her father, which meant Emily had told her the truth about her origins. But then why had she come today? What did she want from him after all these years of silence? He needed to go talk to her, to understand what was happening, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. How could he explain to Celestine, on their wedding day, that he might have a 7-year-old daughter with his ex-fiancée? How could he justify the fact that he had invited that same ex-fiancée to his wedding without telling her? He was caught in a trap of his own making, and the consequences of his actions suddenly loomed over him with brutal clarity. "Alexander, who is that woman looking at you like that?" Celestine's voice snapped him back to reality. His new wife was by his side, her sharp gaze fixed on Emily and the little girl. There was a hint of jealousy in her voice that she tried to mask with social politeness, but Alexander knew her well enough to detect the signs of her brewing displeasure. "An old acquaintance," he answered evasively, striving to keep his tone neutral. "I didn't think she would come." Celestine raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow, Her feminine intuition told her that this old acquaintance was far more than Alexander was willing to admit. And the little girl, she bears a striking resemblance to you, don't you think? Alexander felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. His wife was far from naive, and he knew he wouldn't be able to hide the truth for long. Before he could respond, Emily approached them, still holding her daughter's hand. Each of her steps echoed in Alexander's mind, like the clang of a gong, announcing the inevitable confrontation he so feared. Guests around them began to notice the palpable tension, and conversations hushed, glances becoming more curious. "Hello, Alexander," Emily said, her voice steady as she reached them. "Congratulations on your wedding." Her tone was polite but distant, the kind one uses with a perfect stranger. Only the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her emotion. Alexander opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. He was mesmerized by this woman he had once loved more than anything in the world, and who now stood before him with his daughter, suddenly turning his entire existence upside down. "Hello," he finally managed. "I'm glad you could make it." It was a lie. He wasn't glad. He was terrified, confused, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions he couldn't untangle. Celestine moved closer, her arm sliding possessively around his, marking her territory with the subtlety of a lioness protecting her cub. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand toward Emily. "I'm Celestine Sterling, Alexander's wife." The emphasis she placed on the word wife left no doubt about her intentions. Emily politely shook the extended hand, her smile not wavering for a second. "Emily Davies, it's a pleasure to meet you. Mrs. Sterling, allow me to introduce my daughter, Chloe." The little girl curtsied perfectly, as she had no doubt been taught, and gave Celestine a radiant smile. "Hello, ma'am. Mommy said you were very pretty, and it's true." The child's innocence stood in cruel contrast to the electric tension between the adults. Celestine couldn't help but smile, touched by the child's spontaneity, but Alexander saw that her eyes remained wary. "How old are you, Chloe?" Celestine asked with forced sweetness. "I'm 7.5, ma'am. I'll be 8 in December." Alexander closed his eyes for a second. December. Exactly 9 months after that last night they had spent together. That last night of love before they parted for good. The math was relentless, and there was no longer any possible doubt about the little girl's paternity. The silence that followed was deafening. Celestine, who was no fool, was visibly starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Her gaze darted from Alexander to Emily, then from Emily to Chloe, and he could almost see the gears in her mind turning at top speed. When she finally looked back at her husband, there was a cold glint in her eyes that he had never seen before. "Alexander, could you give me a moment alone?" she asked in a dangerously calm voice. It wasn't really a question, but a thinly veiled command, and they both knew it. Alexander nodded, unable to refuse, even though he knew this conversation would likely be one of the most difficult of his life. "Emily, if you'll excuse us for a few minutes," he said, turning to his ex-fiancée. "Perhaps we can talk later?" Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the delicate situation she had put them in with her mere presence. "Of course. Chloe and I will go look at the gardens in the meantime. They're magnificent." She took her daughter's hand and walked away gracefully, leaving behind a trail of perfume that instantly transported Alexander back 8 years. Celestine waited until they were out of earshot before turning to her husband, her mask of social grace dropping instantly. "Don't tell me you didn't know," she hissed through gritted teeth, her blue eyes flashing. "That child is your spitting image, Alexander. How could you hide something like this from me on our wedding day?" Her voice was low but vibrant with anger, and Alexander realized he had never seen his wife in such a state. "I genuinely didn't know, Celestine," he replied, his voice muffled. "I swear I didn't know. If I had known Emily was pregnant. He trailed off, unable to say what he would have done in that case. Would he have married Emily? Would he have given up Celestine? These questions tortured him, but it was too late to answer them now. Why did you invite her? Celestine asked, her voice cracking slightly. Why did you invite your ex-fiancé to our wedding without even telling me? Was it your intention to humiliate me in front of all of London society? Tears welled in her eyes, and Alexander's heart sank. Whatever the complexity of his feelings, Celestine didn't deserve this. She was a good woman, generous and caring, and she didn't deserve to suffer for his past mistakes. It wasn't my intention, he said, trying to take her hands in his, but she pulled away abruptly. I just wanted to. I don't know what I wanted, Celestine. Maybe to prove to myself that I had moved on. Maybe to have a conversation with her to finally close that chapter of my life. I had no idea she would come with your daughter? Celestine finished bitterly. Your daughter, whose existence you were unaware of until today. How is that possible, Alexander? How can a woman hide a child from a man for 7 years? Her question was a fair one, and Alexander had been asking himself the same thing since he first saw Chloe. Why hadn't Emily said anything? What had driven her to raise their daughter alone for all these years? I don't know, he admitted, but I fully intend to find out. Celestine, I know this is terrible for you, for us, but I can't act as if this child doesn't exist now that I know she's here. She's my daughter. The words burst out before he could stop them, and he immediately saw the effect they had on his wife. She paled, swayed slightly, and had to lean against the castle wall to keep from falling. Your daughter, she repeated, as if the words were poison in her mouth. We've been married for 3 hours, Alexander, and you're already telling me you have a daughter with another woman. How do you expect me to react? How do you expect us to build our future together with this secret between us? Her voice was now thick with sobs that she was desperately trying to suppress, aware that all the guests could be watching them. Alexander wanted to hug her, to reassure her, to promise her that nothing would change between them. But he knew it would be a lie. Everything had changed the moment he laid eyes on Chloe. That child was his flesh and blood, and he could never act as if she didn't exist. At the same time, he loved Celestine, or at least he believed he loved her, and he didn't want their marriage to end before it had even begun. We'll find a solution, he finally said, though he had no idea what that solution could be. Let me talk to Emily, understand why she did this, and then we'll see how to handle the situation. Celestine stared at him, her eyes scrutinizing his face as if she were trying to read their future. All right, she finally said. But know this, Alexander. I will not share my husband with the ghost of his past. Whether that woman has your daughter or not, you will have to make a choice. It's her, or me. But not both. With those words, she turned and walked back to the guests, instantly putting her mask of a radiant newlywed back in place. Alexander watched her go, wondering if he had just lost his wife on their wedding day. He stood alone for a few minutes, trying to collect himself and decide on his next move. Around him, the party was in full swing. Guests laughed, drank champagne, and danced to the orchestra he had specially flown in from London. No one seemed to have noticed the drama that had just unfolded, or at least they were pretending not to save appearances. In the world Alexander moved in, scandals had to be kept secret, emotions contained, and facades maintained at all costs. He finally headed toward the gardens, his heart pounding faster with every step that brought him closer to Emily and Chloe. He found them by the lily pond, the little girl happily counting the goldfish while her mother gazed thoughtfully at the water shimmering in the evening sun. Emily didn't turn around as he approached, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly, betraying that she was aware of his presence. "Hello, Daddy," Chloe exclaimed happily when she saw him, and those two simple words hit Alexander's heart like a bomb. "Daddy!" His own daughter was calling him Daddy, even though they had just met for the first time. How was that possible? What exactly had Emily told her about him? "Hello, Chloe," he replied softly, crouching down to her level. Up close, the resemblance was even more astonishing. This child was a perfect blend of him and Emily, with her brown hair that had auburn highlights, her gray eyes with flecks of green, and her mischievous smile that reminded him so much of his own childhood. "You look very pretty in your blue dress." Chloe beamed at the compliment and twirled her dress coquettishly. "Mommy bought it for me specially to come see you. She said it was a very important day, and I had to look beautiful." Alexander glanced at Emily, who had finally deigned to turn toward them. Her face was impassive, but there was a depth of emotion in her green eyes that he couldn't decipher. "Chloe, would you like to go see the swans in the pond?" Emily asked gently. "Just don't get too close to the edge, okay?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically and skipped away, leaving her parents face to face for the first time in 8 years. The silence that settled between them was heavy, with so many unspoken things, with hushed reproaches and unanswered questions, that Alexander didn't know where or why to begin. He finally managed to utter one simple word that summed up all his queries. "Why? Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you raise our daughter alone? Why come today, on my wedding day?" Emily understood the meaning of his question perfectly, and her face hardened slightly. "Because you made it very clear that you never wanted to see me again," she replied in a calm but reproachful voice. "Because you accused me of terrible things that night, Alexander. Because you refused to listen to me when I tried to tell you the truth. So when I found out I was pregnant, I preferred to raise our daughter far away from you, rather than risk her suffering your disdain." Alexander felt a dagger twist in his chest. That night, 8 years ago, came back to haunt him with painful precision. They had argued because of a photo in a gossip magazine, a photo showing Emily in the arms of another man at a charity gala. Alexander, blinded by jealousy and pride, had refused to listen to her explanations, convinced she was cheating on him. They had made love one last time in a mix of passion and desperation. Then, she had left the next morning without a word, taking all their hopes of happiness with her. "You should have told me about Chloe," he insisted. "Whatever our differences, I had a right to know I had a daughter." Emily let out a bitter laugh that broke his heart. "Oh, yes. And what would you have done, Alexander? Would you have married me out of obligation? Would you have given up your precious career, your ambitions, your lifestyle to be a father with a woman you accused of infidelity? No, I don't think so. I preferred to let you live your life and build my own with our daughter." "And what did you tell her about me?" he asked, looking at Chloe, who was now happily feeding the ducks with some breadcrumbs she had found. "She called me Daddy, as if she'd known me her whole life." Emily's gaze followed his, and her expression softened as she watched their daughter. "I told her the truth, Alexander, that her daddy was a very important, very busy man who couldn't live with us, but that he loved her very much. I showed her your pictures in the papers. I told her about your business successes. I never wanted her to hate you or to think you had willingly abandoned her." This revelation shocked Alexander more than he expected. Despite their painful breakup, Emily had preserved his image in their daughter's eyes. She had allowed her to grow up loving a father she had never known. "Then why now?" he asked. "Why come today on my wedding day? What do you want from me, Emily?" There was a plea in his voice that he didn't even try to hide. He needed to understand, to make sense of this situation that was turning everything he thought he knew about his life upside down. Emily took a deep breath before answering, as if she were gathering the courage to say something difficult. "Because Chloe is sick, Alexander. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and I'm not a match." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Alexander saw tears well up in her green eyes. The doctors say her chances of finding a compatible donor increase significantly if a close relative can be tested. You are her last hope, Alexander." The world crumbled around him. His daughter, this magnificent child he had just discovered, was sick, potentially dying. And Emily had come to see him not to turn his life upside down or to take revenge for old wounds, but to save their daughter. Suddenly, everything made a different kind of sense. Her presence at the wedding, her determination, despite the awkward situation. The courage she had to muster to come and ask for his help. "What illness?" he managed to articulate, his voice a whisper. "Leukemia," Emily replied, discreetly wiping her eyes. "Diagnosed 6 months ago. She has responded well to chemotherapy, but the doctors say a transplant is necessary to ensure a complete cure. I've exhausted all the donor banks in the UK and Europe. You're her last hope, Alexander." Alexander felt his legs give way and had to sit on the stone bench by the pond. His daughter was sick, seriously ill, and he hadn't even known. While he was building his financial empire and planning his dream wedding, his daughter was fighting cancer. Guilt washed over him like a wave, mixed with a terror he had never felt before. He was a man used to controlling every aspect of his life, but here, faced with this revelation, he felt utterly helpless. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emily sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough that he could smell the familiar scent of her skin. "The diagnosis was last October. At first I hoped a compatible donor would turn up, but as the months went by," she shrugged with a resignation that broke his heart. "The doctors insisted I contact the biological father. I resisted as long as I could, Alexander, but I can't let our daughter die because of pride." The word "die" echoed in Alexander's mind like a funeral bell. He looked at Chloe, who was laughing as a swan approached the edge of the pond, so full of life and carefree that it was impossible to imagine she was ill. "She doesn't know how serious it is, does she?" Emily shook her head. "I told her she was a little sick and had to take medicine to get better, but she doesn't know all the details. She's suffered enough with the chemotherapy already." "I'll get tested," Alexander said, without a second's hesitation. "Tomorrow morning. No, tonight if I have to. What do I do? Who do I contact?" For the first time since she had arrived, Emily smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face and reminded Alexander why he had fallen in love with her all those years ago. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew that despite everything that happened between us, you couldn't refuse to help Chloe." "She's my daughter," he replied simply, and those 3 words held all the determination in the world. "Even if I just met her, she's my daughter, and I will do everything in my power to save her." He turned to Emily, their gazes meeting for the first time since they had started talking. "Why did you wait until today? You could have come to me earlier," explained the situation. Emily looked away, ashamed. "I tried to contact you several times. I called your office, but your assistant always said you were in a meeting or traveling. I wrote letters that I never sent, and then I saw the announcement of your wedding in the papers, and I thought that if you invited me, maybe it would be a sign that you were willing to listen to me." She let out a small, nervous laugh. "I never expected you to actually do it." "Me neither," Alexander admitted. "I don't even know why I did. Maybe to prove to myself that I had moved on. Or maybe—" He didn't finish his sentence, unable to confess that maybe, deep down, he had hoped to see her again. "In any case, I'm glad you came, even if the circumstances are—" He searched for the words. "Complicated." Chloe came running back to them, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. "Mommy, Daddy, did you see the swans? They're magnificent. And there are little babies, too." The child's enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the seriousness of the situation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. This child was a ray of sunshine, and the thought that she might be in danger filled him with a fierce protectiveness. "Yes, darling, we saw them," Emily replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "Chloe, would you like to spend some time with Daddy? Maybe the two of you could get to know each other." Chloe nodded vigorously, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Oh, yes. Can you tell me about your job, Daddy? Mommy says you build very important things." Alexander's heart ached. This child was looking at him with such unconditional love and admiration that it moved him to his core. How could he have missed all this? How could he have lived 7 years without knowing about the existence of this wonderful little being, his own flesh and blood? "Of course, little one," he replied, kneeling down in front of her. "But first, you tell me what you like to do. What are your favorite games? What's your favorite color?" Chloe launched into an enthusiastic chatter, telling him she loved to draw, that she took piano lessons, that she loved princess stories, but also pirate adventures, and that her favorite color was violet, like her doll's eyes. As he listened to his daughter, Alexander felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw Philip approaching with his usual grave expression. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but Mrs. Sterling is looking for you. The guests are beginning to wonder about your absence." The brutal return to reality hit Alexander like a slap. His wedding, Celestine, his guests, his new life waiting for him at the estate. How was he going to reconcile all this with this discovery that changed everything? "I'll be there in a few minutes, Philip," he replied. His assistant nodded and walked away discreetly. But Alexander saw that he had noticed the striking resemblance between himself and Chloe. Philip was an intelligent and discreet man who had managed many delicate situations for his boss over the years, but this one surpassed anything they had ever encountered. "I have to get back to my guests," he said to Emily as he stood up. "But we need to talk, really talk, about Chloe, about her treatment, about what we're going to do now." Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the impossible situation he was in. "Of course. We can leave now if you prefer. I didn't want to disrupt your evening more than necessary." "No," Alexander said, more firmly than he had intended. "No, don't leave. Not yet. Chloe, would you like to see the inside of the estate? There are very beautiful paintings, and even a library with old books." The little girl's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, are there history books?" "Lots," Alexander promised. "Philip will give you a tour while I tend to my guests, and then we'll all have dinner together. Does that sound good to you?" Emily seemed to hesitate. "Alexander, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Your wife didn't seem very happy to see us, and I can understand that. After all, it's her wedding day." But Alexander had made up his mind. He had just discovered he had a daughter, that she was sick, and he wasn't going to let her leave without having some time to get to know her better. "Celestine will understand," he said, hoping it was true. "Philip, could you have 2 extra place settings prepared for dinner and show Miss Chloe the estate? She loves stories." His assistant nodded without asking questions, long accustomed to his boss's unexpected requests. "Of course, sir. Miss Chloe, if you'll follow me." Chloe confidently took Philip's extended hand. Then she turned back to Alexander. "Will you come find us soon, Daddy?" That innocent question tied a knot in his throat. "Yes, darling, very soon. In the meantime, be good for Mr. Philip." He watched his daughter walk away toward the estate, her little hand in his assistant's, and he had the surreal impression of living a waking dream. "Alexander," Emily said softly when they were alone, "I know this is a lot for you. If you need time to think, to process all this, I can understand. Chloe and I can go back to London and come back when you're ready to." "No," he interrupted her. "No, Emily. I've already lost 7 years of my daughter's life. I don't want to lose another minute." He walked toward the estate with a determined stride, Emily by his side. It was time to face Celestine and his guests, to explain a situation that he himself didn't yet fully understand. But one thing was certain. He would not deny his daughter, whatever the consequences for his marriage and social life. The party was still in full swing when they reached the terrace. The orchestra was playing a Viennese waltz, and several couples were dancing under the string lights that had begun to glow in the twilight. Alexander scanned the crowd for Celestine and found her in an animated conversation with her mother and some friends, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked up at him as he approached, and he immediately saw that she had been crying despite her carefully retouched makeup. "Ladies, would you mind excusing us for a moment?" he asked politely. "I'd like to speak with my wife alone." Celestine's friends exchanged knowing glances, but tactfully moved away, leaving the newlyweds face to face. Celestine drained her glass of champagne in one gulp before looking him straight in the eye. "Well," she said simply, "what did she tell you to justify hiding the existence of your daughter for 7 years?" Her voice was calm, too calm, and Alexander recognized the signs of one of her cold rages, which was far more formidable than her outbursts. "She didn't hide her out of malice, Celestine," he said, choosing his words carefully, aware that everything he said could be used against him. "Our breakup was very ugly. I said terrible things. I refused to listen to her. When she found out she was pregnant, she preferred to raise our daughter alone rather than risk me rejecting her." Celestine let out a humorless laugh. "How touching. And of course you forgive her. You forgive her for depriving you of your daughter, and for your daughter being deprived of her father. But tell me, Alexander, why did she come today? What does she want?" His wife's astuteness no longer surprised him. Celestine had always had an infallible instinct for guessing people's hidden motivations. "Chloe is sick," he confessed, and immediately saw Celestine's expression change. "She has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. Emily is not a match and is hoping I am." The silence that followed this revelation was heavy. Celestine stared at him, and he saw a succession of emotions flit across her face. Surprise, compassion, but also a painful resignation. "Your daughter is dying," she finally said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "And your ex-girlfriend came to ask you to save her on your wedding day to another woman." She shook her head, as if she couldn't believe the situation. "It sounds like the script of a bad melodrama. Celestine, I know this is incredibly difficult for you, for us, but this child is your daughter," she finished. "Yes, Alexander, I get it. Your daughter, whom you didn't know an hour ago, and for whom you are now willing to turn our wedding upside down." There was a bitterness in her voice that he had never heard before, and he realized he was losing his wife on the very day of their union. "That's not what I want," he protested. "I want our marriage to work, Celestine, but I can't ignore Chloe's existence now that I know she's here, and I can't let her die if I have the power to save her." Celestine stared at him, and he saw tears glisten in her blue eyes. "I know," she said softly. "And that's exactly why I'm losing you, isn't it? Because you're a good man, Alexander, a man who could never abandon his daughter, even a daughter he doesn't know. And I'm just a wife of a few hours who suddenly finds herself competing with a sick child and the woman of your life." "Emily is not the woman of my life," Alexander protested. But even to his own ears, his words sounded false. "You're the one I married, Celestine. You're the one I love." Celestine gave a sad smile that broke his heart. "You think you love me, Alexander, but look at yourself since she arrived. Your eyes are shining in a way I've never seen before. That woman and that child have awakened something in you that I've never been able to touch." He wanted to protest, but deep down, he knew she was right. Ever since he had seen Emily and Chloe, he had felt alive in a way he had forgotten, as if a part of him that had been dormant for 8 years had suddenly woken up. This didn't mean he didn't love Celestine, but he was forced to admit that his feelings had never had the same burning intensity he had known with Emily. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, feeling helpless. "Tell me what you expect of me, Celestine, and I'll do it." She looked at him with infinite sadness, and he understood that she had already made her decision. "What I want is for you to get tested for your daughter. I want you to save her if you can, and I want you to be honest with yourself about what you truly feel for her mother." "And us?" he asked hoarsely. "What's going to happen to us?" Celestine took his hands in hers, her fingers caressing the ring he had only worn for a few hours. "I don't know, Alexander. Maybe we'll manage to get through this. Maybe you'll choose your new family. Or maybe we'll discover that our marriage was a mistake from the beginning." He couldn't deny it. Maybe their marriage was indeed a mistake. Maybe he had married Celestine because she represented stability, respectability, everything a man of his standing was supposed to desire, instead of for true love. This thought terrified him, but he could no longer ignore it. "I don't want to lose you," he said sincerely. Celestine smiled through her tears. "I don't want to lose you either, but I also don't want a husband who stays with me out of obligation or habit. If we are to be together, Alexander, it has to be because we truly love each other, not because we signed some papers this morning." The orchestra started a new, softer, more melancholic tune. Around them, the guests continued to party, oblivious to the drama unfolding between the newlyweds. Alexander wanted to stop time, to go back a few hours, before Emily and Chloe had burst into his life and turned everything upside down. But he knew it was impossible. He could no longer act as if his daughter didn't exist. "Mr. Sterling?" Philip's voice made him jump. His assistant was a few feet away, accompanied by Chloe, who was holding a book in her hand, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Miss Chloe would like to show you something she found in the library." Alexander exchanged a look with Celestine, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever happened between them, he couldn't make this innocent child pay for the complications of their adult lives. "What did you find, little one?" Alexander asked, kneeling down in front of his daughter. Chloe proudly held out the book to him. "It's a very old book of French stories. Mr. Philip says it's more than 100 years old. And look, it has beautiful drawings." She opened the book to an illustrated page showing a princess in a castle, and Alexander recognized one of the works from the Vance family collection. "It's very beautiful indeed," he said, admiring the delicate illuminations. "Do you know how to read Old French?" Chloe shook her head sadly. "No, the words are too hard, but Mommy is teaching me modern French at home. She says it's important to know several languages." Alexander glanced at Celestine, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. "Hello, little one," Celestine said suddenly, walking over to Chloe. "How was your tour of the estate?" The little girl looked up at her with her big gray eyes, a little intimidated by the young woman's elegance. "Very good, ma'am. Your house is very beautiful. It's a real princess castle." Despite the tension of the situation, Celestine couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, darling. And tell me, are you hungry? Dinner will be served soon." Alexander was moved to see his wife making an effort to be kind to Chloe, despite the circumstances. Whatever the outcome of their marital crisis, Celestine was still a woman of class, who would never make a child pay for the mistakes of adults. "Oh, yes, I'm very hungry," Chloe exclaimed. "And so is Mommy. She hasn't eaten anything since this morning. She was so nervous about coming to see you." This innocent revelation reminded Alexander that Emily was also having a very difficult time in this situation. She must have mustered enormous courage to come and see him on his wedding day, knowing she risked being poorly received, all in the hope of saving their daughter. He realized he hadn't even thought to ask her how she was doing, if she needed financial help for Chloe's care, if she was facing this ordeal alone. "Where is Mommy, by the way?" he asked Chloe. "She stayed in the library," the little girl replied. "She was looking at the books, but she looked sad. I think she was crying a little." This information squeezed Alexander's heart. Emily was crying, alone in the library, while he was arguing with his wife on the terrace. He had to go see her, to make sure she was okay. "Philip, could you take Chloe to the dining room and have them serve her a snack while dinner is being prepared?" he asked. "I'd like to speak with her mother." His assistant nodded and held out his hand to the child. "Come along, Miss Chloe. I think the chefs have prepared some delicious appetizers, and maybe even some hot chocolate, if you're good." Chloe clapped with excitement and followed Philip without protest, taking her precious book with her. When she was out of earshot, Celestine Turtositin turned to Alexander. "Go see her," she said simply. "That poor woman must be very upset. I'll take care of our guests. Someone has to play host." There was a resignation in her voice that pained Alexander, but also a generosity that reminded him why he had wanted to marry her. "Celestine," he began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. "Go, Alexander. We'll have a lifetime to talk about us. That woman and that child need you now." She kissed him quickly on the cheek, a kiss as light as a feather, and then returned to her guests with her perfectly in-place facade of a smile. Alexander headed toward the library, his heart pounding. He found Emily standing in front of the large window overlooking the gardens, her arms crossed over her chest, in a defensive posture he knew well. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly. "Chloe told me you were sad," he said softly. "Are you okay?" "How can I be okay, Alexander?" she replied without turning around. "I just crashed your new life on your wedding day to tell you we have a daughter together and that she's dying. Your wife hates me. Your guests look at me like an intruder. And you—" She broke off, her voice cracking slightly. "And you look completely lost." He approached her slowly, as one would approach a wounded animal. "I am lost, it's true, but not for the reasons you think." She finally turned, and he saw that she had indeed been crying. Her green eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup slightly smudged despite her efforts to fix it. She was still beautiful, breathtakingly beautiful, and he felt the urge to hug her, to comfort her, as he had so many times in the past. "I'm lost because everything I believed in just fell apart in a few hours," he continued. "I thought I had built a perfect life, stable, predictable, and suddenly you show up with our daughter, and everything I thought was important seems futile. My businesses, my marriage, my reputation, none of that matters in the face of the fact that Chloe is sick." Emily stared at him, trying to decipher his feelings. "I'm sorry, Alexander. I'm sorry for bursting into your life like this, for turning everything upside down. If I had had the choice—" "You did the right thing," he interrupted her. "You did the right thing by coming. I have a right to know my daughter, and she has a right to have a father, even if I'm finding out 8 years too late." 8.5, Emily corrected automatically, and they both smiled, despite the seriousness of the situation. This small moment of lightness reminded him of the time they were happy together, when they could laugh about anything and everything, when the future seemed bright and full of promise. "Tell me about her illness," he asked, sitting down in one of the leather armchairs in the library. "I want to know everything. How long has she been sick? How did you find out? What are the treatments, the prognoses?" Emily sat opposite him, and for the next half hour, she told him everything. The first symptoms she had put down to school fatigue, the tests that had revealed the horrible truth, the nights spent at the hospital while Chloe was undergoing chemotherapy, the terror of losing her that woke her up every night. Alexander listened in silence, his heart aching for everything Emily had had to endure alone. How had she found the strength to keep working, to smile for their daughter, to make her believe that everything would be okay? He admired her strength, her determination, but he was also consumed by guilt for not having been there to support them. "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" he asked when she had finished. "From the diagnosis, you should have called me. No matter what happened between us, Emily, This is about our daughter's life. I tried, Alexander. I really did. But every time I tried to call you, I remembered that night. Your accusations. The way you looked at me, telling me you never wanted to see me again. I was angry, he said weakly. I was jealous and proud, and I said things I didn't really mean. Emily gave a bitter smile. You thought I was cheating on you with Marcus Dubois. You refused to listen to my explanations. You accused me of being a liar and a manipulator. And when I tried to tell you that that photo only showed a courtesy dance at a charity gala, you told me you didn't want to hear any more of my lies. Alexander closed his eyes, remembering that terrible night when his jealousy had destroyed their love. He had been furious when he discovered that photo of Emily in the arms of Marcus Dubois, a man he had hated since his college years and who was now his direct competitor in business. He hadn't wanted to hear that it was a simple protocol dance, that the photographer had captured the one moment they were together all night. His wounded pride and sick jealousy had triumphed over his reason. I found out the truth a few months later, he confessed, his voice hoarse. Marcus himself told me, laughing, that the photo had been taken at the moment protocol required him to dance with all the important women of the evening. He thought it was funny that it might have caused problems between us. The memory of that belated revelation still pained him. He had destroyed their love for nothing, out of pure stupidity and male pride. But you never contacted me to apologize, Emily said, in a soft but reproachful voice. You preferred to maintain your pride rather than admit your mistakes. Alexander opened his eyes and met her gaze. I tried, he said. God knows I tried, Emily. But you had disappeared. You had moved, changed your number, left your job. No one knew where you had gone. I even hired a private detective to find you. But you seem to have erased all traces of your existence. This revelation surprised Emily. You tried to find me. For months, Alexander confirmed. I went crazy. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I was obsessed with the idea of finding you to beg for your forgiveness. My loved ones finally convinced me that it was better to stop, to turn the page, and rebuild my life. Just as I was giving up the search, you were discovering you were pregnant with my daughter. Emily was silent for a long moment, processing this information. I didn't know, she finally murmured. I thought you had been relieved to see me go, that you had quickly found someone else. It took me 6 years to agree to go out with another man, Alexander confessed. And even then, my relationship with Celestine is more of a marriage of convenience than a great passion. My parents and hers had wanted this union for a long time. You don't love her? Emily asked, and there was something in her voice he couldn't quite identify. Curiosity. Hope. I thought I loved her, he answered honestly. Or rather, I convinced myself that what I felt for her was love. Celestine is a wonderful woman, intelligent, elegant. She would make a perfect wife for any man. But? Emily encouraged him. Alexander looked her straight in the eyes before answering. But I don't feel the same passion for her that I felt for you. That's the truth. The silence that followed this confession was charged with electricity. Emily had blushed and looked away, visibly moved by his words. Alexander, she finally said, we can't go back. Too much has happened. Too much water has passed under the bridge. You're married now, and She hesitated. I've learned to live without you. Is there someone in your life? He asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. Emily shook her head. No. How could there be? Between work, Chloe, and now her illness, I haven't had the time or energy for romantic relationships. Besides, how do I explain to a man that my daughter is the child of one of the most eligible bachelors in Britain? Most would have run a mile. You should have told me about Chloe from her birth, Alexander insisted. No matter our personal issues, I had a right to know my daughter, and she had a right to know her father. You're right, Emily admitted. I know that now. But at the time, I was young. I was hurt. terrified at the idea of raising a child alone. I was only 26, Alexander. She took a deep breath. I made the decision that seemed best at the time. Before Alexander could reply, the library door opened, and Chloe ran in, followed by Philip, who seemed slightly out of breath. "Mommy! Daddy! You have to come see! There are musicians playing the harp, and Mrs. Sterling said I could ask them to play my favorite song." The child's enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the seriousness of their conversation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. "What's your favorite song, little one?" he asked, getting up to approach his daughter. "La Vie en Rose," Chloe exclaimed. "Mommy sings it to me every night before I go to sleep. It's our special song." Alexander glanced at Emily, who had blushed. That song had been theirs too, the one they listened to, holding each other close in their small flat in the city, when they were young and carefree. "It's a very beautiful song," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sure the musicians would be delighted to play it for you." He took Chloe's hand in his, still marveling at the softness of that little hand, a perfect blend of his and Emily's. "But first, how about you meet some of my friends? There are some very interesting people here tonight." The three of them returned to the terrace where the reception was in full swing. Alexander proudly introduced Chloe to some carefully selected guests, the ones he knew were discreet enough not to spread gossip all over London the next day. The little girl charmed everyone with her spontaneity and intelligence, asking pertinent questions of ambassadors about their countries, complimenting the ladies on their dresses, and listening with fascination to the stories told by captains of industry. Celestine watched the scene from afar, and Alexander saw that she was torn between admiration for this exceptional child and the pain of seeing her husband so radiant with paternal pride for the daughter of another woman. When their eyes met, she gave him a sad but sincere smile, and he understood that she was doing everything she could to accept a situation that was completely beyond her control. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall of the estate, a magnificent room with its 18th century wood paneling and crystal chandeliers. Alexander had Emily and Chloe seated at his table, despite the looks of surprise from some guests who wondered who these mysterious last-minute guests were. Celestine had insisted that Chloe sit between her and Alexander, and she spent the evening attending to the child with a kindness that deeply moved Alexander. "Mrs. Sterling," Chloe said, savoring her dessert, "your castle is really magical. It's like in a history book. You must feel like a real princess here." Celestine smiled, the first genuine smile since Emily had arrived. "Thank you, darling. And where do you live with your—" "Mommy, we have a small apartment in London," Chloe replied. "It's not as big as your castle, but Mommy says it's our cozy little nest, and we have a terrace with flowers." "That must be very nice," Celestine said politely. "And what do you like to do when you're not at school?" "I like to draw, play the piano, read stories, and I love to cook with Mommy. She teaches me how to make cakes." Chloe turned to Alexander. "Daddy, can you cook?" His daughter's innocent question made Alexander smile. "Not very well, I'm afraid. I'm better at ordering in restaurants than making meals." "I could teach you," Chloe offered enthusiastically. "Mommy says I'm good at making cookies. We could make cookies together." The idea of cooking with his daughter filled Alexander with a joy he had never felt before. "That would be wonderful, little one. I would love to learn how to make cookies with you." The evening continued in a strange atmosphere, a mix of joy and tension. The guests were having fun, dancing and laughing, celebrating what was supposed to be one of the most beautiful days of Alexander's life. But he couldn't help thinking that this day might, on the contrary, mark the end of an era. Chloe had eventually fallen asleep on a sofa in the ballroom, exhausted by all the day's emotions, and Emily watched over her tenderly. "She's adorable," Celestine said, as she approached Emily. The two women were alone for the first time that night, as Alexander had gone to greet some guests who were leaving. "You've done a wonderful job with her." Emily looked up at her rival, surprised by the sincerity of her tone. "Thank you," she said simply. "She's the light of my life." "It shows," Celestine replied. "She talks about you with so much love and admiration. You must be an extraordinary mother." An awkward silence settled between them, as neither woman knew how to address the delicate situation they were in. It was Celestine who finally broke the silence. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Emily nodded. "Are you still in love with him?" The direct question took Emily by surprise, who didn't expect such frankness. She began. "It's complicated," she finally answered. "Alexander and I shared something very strong in the past, but that's in the past. I didn't come here to win anyone back, Mrs. Sterling. I came here to save my daughter." "Our daughter," Celestine corrected softly. "She's his daughter too now." "Yes," Emily admitted. "And I know that changes everything for you. I'm sorry for bursting into your life like this on your wedding day, if I had had the choice." "You did the right thing," Celestine interrupted, echoing the words Alexander had spoken earlier. "This child needs her father, and he needs to know his daughter, even if it makes all of our lives terribly complicated." Emily studied Celestine's face, trying to understand this woman, who showed such grace in the face of adversity. "You really love him," she said, and it wasn't a question. Celestine gave a sad smile. "Yes, I do, but I'm starting to realize that maybe he doesn't love me the same way. Or at least not the way he loves you." This confession moved Emily, who hadn't imagined that Alexander's wife could be so clear-sighted about the situation. "I don't want to ruin your marriage," she said sincerely. "I just want Chloe to have a chance to survive. And if that means Alexander has to be a part of her life, then so be it. But I'm not looking to resume my relationship with him. Too much has changed." Celestine stared at her, trying to discern the sincerity of her words. "Do you really mean that?" "Yes," Emily replied firmly. "I'm no longer the naive young woman I once was. I've learned to live alone, to be strong for my daughter. I don't need to be saved anymore." Alexander chose that moment to return to them, and immediately sensed the tension between the two women. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking from his wife to his ex-fiancée. "Perfectly," Celestine replied, getting up. "Emily and I were getting to know each other. You have a remarkable daughter, Alexander. You can be proud." With those words, she walked away, leaving Alexander perplexed by what had just happened. "What did you talk about?" he asked Emily. "Chloe, the situation, what we're going to do now." Emily tenderly stroked the hair of her sleeping daughter. "Your wife is a good person, Alexander. She doesn't deserve to suffer for our past mistakes." Alexander sat beside her, contemplating Chloe's peaceful face. "What are we going to do, Emily? How are we going to manage all this?" "One step at a time," she replied practically. "First, you get the compatibility test. Then we see if you can help Chloe. And after that," she shrugged, "after that, we'll improvise. The important thing is that she gets well. The rest we'll deal with later." Alexander nodded, once again admiring Emily's strength and pragmatism. She had always had that ability to focus on the essential when the situation became critical. "I'll call my doctor tomorrow morning," he promised. "No, I'll call him tonight. I want to get this test done as soon as possible." "Alexander," Emily said softly, "you need to know one thing. Even if you're a match, there's no guarantee the transplant will work. Doctors are talking about a 70% chance of success at best. And even if everything goes well, Chloe will need months of rehabilitation, of medical follow-up." "I know," he said, "and I'll be there, for all of it. I will never let my daughter face anything alone again." The determination in his voice was absolute, and Emily felt tears well up in her eyes. Finally, after so many years, Chloe was going to have a present father in her life. Whatever happened between Alexander and her, their daughter would no longer be alone. The last guests left around 1 in the morning, leaving the estate in a relative silence. Philip had prepared a suite for Emily and Chloe, understanding that their presence would be necessary in the coming days. Chloe was still sleeping soundly, exhausted by all the day's emotions, and Alexander carried her to her room himself, moved to finally hold his daughter in his arms. "She's so light," he whispered to Emily as he gently laid her on the bed. "Is that normal? Has she lost weight because of the illness?" "A little," Emily admitted as she tucked her daughter in tenderly. "But she's doing better now. The chemotherapy had weakened her a lot, but since she's been in remission, she's regaining her strength." Alexander watched Chloe's sleeping face, noticing the paleness of her complexion and the slight dark circles under her eyes. His daughter was sick, truly sick, and he hadn't been there to support her. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for not having been there, Emily. For her birth, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, and now for her illness. What kind of father am I?" Emily placed a comforting hand on his arm. "It's not your fault, Alexander. You didn't know she existed, and now that you do, you're here. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Chloe sleep, united in their love for this child they had created together, and whom life had separated them from. "She looks like you when she sleeps," Emily whispered. "She has your serious expression, as if she's thinking about important things, even while she dreams." Alexander smiled, moved by the observation. "And she has your determination. This evening, when she absolutely wanted to feed the ducks, she reminded me of you when you got an idea in your head. I hope she also has your strength to face what's ahead," Emily said with emotion. "She's going to need all of our courage." "She will have it," Alexander promised. "We'll be strong for her, both of us." The words, "we, both of us," resonated between them as both a promise and a question. Were they truly capable of being a team for their daughter after everything that had happened between them? They tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door ajar so they could hear Chloe if she woke up. In the dimly lit hallway of the estate, they stood face to face, suddenly aware that they were alone for the first time in hours. The atmosphere between them was charged with contradictory emotions: regret for the past, hope for the future, a mutual attraction they no longer dared to confess. "I should get to bed," Emily said, breaking the silence that was becoming awkward. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Alexander nodded, but made no move to leave. Emily suddenly said, "I know we can't erase the past, but I wish we could be friends for Chloe's sake, but also for us. I've missed you so much." This confession moved Alexander more than he wanted to admit. "I've missed you too," he admitted. "More than I would have liked. But Alexander, you're married now. We have to be very careful with our feelings. Chloe needs us to be balanced, not to create more complications." "I know," he said. "You're right. But knowing that you don't hate me, that maybe we could be friends again, that gives me hope." "Good night, Alexander," Emily said softly, walking toward her room. "Good night, Emily," he replied, watching her go. When she disappeared into her room, he stood still for a moment, his heart pounding. His life had just been turned completely upside down, and he still didn't know where he was headed. But one thing was for sure: he would never give up on his daughter, whatever the consequences. He finally went to his own room, where Celestine was waiting for him. She was sitting in front of her dressing table, slowly and meticulously removing her makeup. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Alexander saw all the tiredness and sadness his wife had hidden behind her facade of a smile all night. "How is she?" Celestine asked without turning around. "She's asleep. She's exhausted by all her emotions." Alexander walked over to her, hesitating. "Celestine, I know this day has been terrible for you. I know none of this was planned, and I—" "Don't apologize," she interrupted him. "It's not your fault. This situation is too much for all of us." She finally turned to him, and he saw that she had been crying. Just tell me one thing, Alexander. Are you happy to have discovered the existence of your daughter? The question was loaded, but Alexander decided to be honest. Yes, he replied without hesitation. Despite the circumstances, despite the complexity of the situation, yes, I'm happy to know Chloe exists. She's extraordinary, Celestine. Smart, funny, lovable. I can't regret meeting her. Celestine nodded, as if this answer confirmed what she already knew. And what do you feel about seeing her again? The question was even more difficult, and Alexander took time to reflect before answering. I feel a lot of things, he finally said. Guilt for the way we broke up, admiration for the strength she has shown in raising Chloe alone, gratitude for having come to find me despite everything that happened between us. And love? Celestine insisted. Do you still feel love for her? Alexander closed his eyes, unable to meet his wife's gaze. I don't know, he confessed. I thought I had moved on, but seeing her again today has awakened things I thought were buried. But Celestine, that doesn't change my feelings for you. You're my wife, and I want our marriage to work, even if she were free, even if she wanted you. Celestine's voice was now heavy with pain, and Alexander realized his wife was suffering more than she wanted to show. Celestine, please don't ask me to answer hypothetical questions. The reality is that you are my wife. Emily has her own life, and we all have to learn to coexist for Chloe's sake. You're not answering my question, Celestine insisted, because you already know the answer, don't you? If that woman held out her hand to you, you would take it without hesitation. You would give up on me, on our marriage, on everything we have built together. Her voice broke on the last words, and Alexander's heart sank. He didn't want to hurt Celestine, but he couldn't lie to her either. I don't know what I would do, he said sincerely. This is all too new, too overwhelming. I need time to understand what I feel, to see my way through my feelings. But Celestine, I promise you one thing. I will be honest with you. If my feelings change, if I realize I can't be the husband you deserve, I'll tell you. You don't deserve to be lied to or to have someone stay with you out of pity. She stared at him, and he saw a succession of emotions pass through her eyes. Pain, anger, resignation, but also a form of respect for his honesty. That's all I can ask for, she finally said. Honesty, even if the truth hurts. She got up and went to bed, her slow, tired movements betraying the emotional exhaustion of the day. Where are you going to sleep? She asked, seeing that Alexander wasn't moving. In my study, he replied. I think we both need space to think. Celestine nodded, grateful that he wasn't pretending everything was okay between them. Good night, Alexander, she said, as she slid under the covers. Good night, Celestine, and thank you. Thank you for what? For being so kind to Chloe tonight. You could have been cold or hostile, but you were wonderful to her. That means a lot to me. Celestine gave a sad smile. She's not to blame for all this mess. And besides, how could anyone not love her? With those words, she turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. Alexander stood still for a moment, then quietly left the room. He went to his study, a room he had set up in a tower of the estate that served as his refuge when he needed to think. The walls were lined with books, and a large window overlooked the moonlit gardens. Alexander sat in his leather armchair and stared out at the night, trying to take stock of this day that had changed everything. He was a father. This thought filled him with a joy he had never felt before, mixed with a panicked terror at the idea that his daughter was sick. Chloe was everything he had ever dreamed of in a child. Smart, funny, endearing, curious about everything. In just a few hours, she had completely captured his heart. He was willing to do anything to save her, even give his own life if necessary. And Emily. Seeing Emily again was like a punch to the stomach. All the emotions he thought he had gotten over had come rushing back. Love, desire, regret, guilt. She was even more beautiful than before, but above all, she had acquired a strength and maturity that made her even more captivating. The way she had raised their daughter alone, the way she faced the illness with courage, the way she had come to see him despite their painful past, all of it commanded his admiration. And Celestine, his poor wife, who found herself caught in a storm she hadn't seen coming. Alexander sincerely loved her, but he was beginning to realize that his love was perhaps more affection and mutual respect than a true passion. Celestine deserved better than a husband who dreamed of another woman. But how could he tell her that the day after their wedding? This captivating story is far from over. If you want to know what happens next, please like this story and subscribe to our channel for more. What do you think about the dilemmas Alexander is facing? How do you see the continuation of this complex story between the love of the past, the obligations of the present, and the hope for Chloe's future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions are of the utmost importance for the continuation of this emotional saga.